Tavano walked back into the village, his heart pounding in his chest. Buzara was beside him, but no one could see what he saw. The woman who once had wrinkled skin and weary eyes now carried the beauty of a goddess, but only when they were alone. In the eyes of the villagers, she still appeared as the old woman they all knew, frail, bent, and unremarkable. Whispers spread like wildfire. The people gathered in clusters, pointing and murmuring as Tavano passed. Why did he look different? Why did he walk with such confidence, dressed in fine robes? And why was the poor boy who once had nothing now standing tall, as if he held the world in his hands? Something was not right. King Mokale sat upon his high throne, his sharp eyes watching the commotion from afar. His advisors leaned in, whispering their doubts, their suspicions. When Tavano and Buzara reached the palace gates, the king did not wait. He raised his hand, and silence fell. "Tavano," the king's voice boomed, "you left as a beggar and returned as a man of wealth. You married this woman, this old woman, and yet there is something about you that does not sit well with me." His gaze narrowed. "Tell me, what trickery is at play here?" Tavano's throat tightened. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes upon him. He knew the truth could never be spoken. He could not tell them that Buzara was no ordinary woman, that beneath her aged form lay a secret more powerful than they could ever imagine. "My king," he said, choosing his words carefully, "there is no trickery. I have simply honored my promise. Buzara is my wife, and what you see before you is the truth." But the villagers were not convinced. The air was thick with doubt. They had lived too long in a world where miracles did not happen to men like Tavano. And so, the rumors began. The murmurs grew louder, and deep in the shadows, jealous hearts stirred, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The village could not rest. Ever since Tavano returned, something felt off, like a storm was brewing beneath the surface. The people gathered in hushed circles, their voices low but urgent. They spoke of things they could not explain, how the boy who had nothing now carried himself like a prince, how the old woman he married seemed untouched by time in ways they could not understand. Among them was Faru, the village elder, a man whose wisdom was both feared and respected. He had seen many things in his lifetime, and he did not trust the unknown. Sitting beneath the great baobab tree, he stroked his grey beard and listened to the whispers around him. Then, in a grave voice, he spoke. "This is not natural," he declared, his deep eyes scanning the crowd. "There are forces in this world beyond what we can see. The woman, Buzara, she is not what she appears to be. I have seen such things before. She is using dark magic to trap the boy. He does not know it yet, but he is not in control of his own fate." The villagers gasped. Some nodded, fear creeping into their hearts. Others shivered at the thought. Magic was a dangerous thing, a thing that could twist reality and bend men to its will. And then there was Zalika. She stood at the edge of the gathering, listening with burning jealousy in her eyes. She had never accepted that Tavano had chosen someone else, especially not a woman like Buzara. Now she saw her chance. She stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Elder Faru speaks the truth," she said, her hands clasped together as if she were merely a worried friend. "Tavano has changed. Can't you see it? His eyes do not hold the same light they once did. He moves as if he is not himself. He speaks of love. But is it love? Or is it a spell?" The villagers turned to each other, doubt spreading like a disease. Was Tavano truly in love? Or was he under an enchantment? Had the old woman cursed him? Zalika took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make them lean in. "If this is magic, it is dangerous. And if it is dangerous, then we must do something before it is too late." Faru nodded gravely. "The king must know," he said. "If dark forces are at work, we cannot stand by and do nothing." The decision was made. The whispers had turned into something more, a rising tide of fear and suspicion that would not stop until the truth, or what they believed to be the truth, was revealed. And in the heart of it all, Zalika smiled, because she knew that once doubt had been planted, it would grow, and soon Tavano and Buzara would have nowhere to hide. The throne room was silent, but the tension in the air was thick. Tavano stood before King Mokale, his hands clenched at his sides, his heart pounding like a war drum. The whispers had reached the king's ears, and now There was no turning back. Mukale leaned forward, his piercing gaze locked onto Tavano. "You returned a different man," the king said slowly. "Stronger, wealthier, more confident. And yet, you offer no answers. The woman you married, she is not ordinary, is she?" Tavano swallowed hard. He knew any wrong word could seal his fate. "Buzara is my wife. That is all that matters," he said, keeping his voice steady. But the king shook his head. "That is not enough. The people whisper of dark magic. Even my wisest elders suspect trickery, and I am a ruler. I cannot allow my kingdom to be fooled." The court murmured in agreement. Faces lined with doubt and fear stared at Tavano, waiting for him to break, waiting for him to confess that everything was a lie. Then, King Mukale rose from his throne. His voice was like thunder as he declared, "If your love is true, if your wife is no deceiver, then prove it. I will set 3 tasks, impossible tasks. If you succeed, your place in this kingdom is yours to keep. If you fail," he let the words hang in the air. No one needed him to finish the sentence. Failure meant exile, or worse. Tavano's breath caught in his throat. He glanced around the room. Zalika was watching from the shadows, her lips curled into a smirk. Faru, the old elder, shook his head as if he had already decided Tavano's doom. The villagers, the nobles, the warriors, none of them believed he could survive this. But then he thought of Buzara. He thought of the way she had transformed before his very eyes, of the power she held, the wisdom in her voice. And he knew one thing for certain. He could not let them take this life from him. Lifting his chin, he met the king's gaze with unwavering determination. "Name your tasks," Tavano said, his voice strong. "I will prove my worth." The court erupted into whispers, some shocked, some amused. King Mokale studied Tavano for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. The first task will be announced at dawn." With that, the king turned and walked away, his golden robe trailing behind him. The decision had been made. As the crowd dispersed, Zalika stepped closer to Tavano, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should have walked away while you had the chance," she said, her eyes glinting with cruelty. "You don't know what you've just agreed to." Tavano said nothing. He simply clenched his fists, holding on to the one thing that mattered. He had no choice but to win. The sun had barely risen when the village gathered at the foot of the sacred mountain. The air was thick with tension, and even the wind carried whispers of fear. Today was the first test, and many believed it would also be Tavano's last. King Mukale stood tall before the crowd, his voice ringing out. "The first task is simple," he announced. "Tavano must enter the cave of fire and capture Njoro, the serpent that breathes flames, a beast feared by warriors, untouched by mortals. If he returns with the serpent alive, he will have proven his strength. If not..." The king paused, letting the unspoken fate sink in. The villagers murmured. Some shook their heads. This was no test. It was a death sentence. No man had ever returned from that cave. Even the bravest warriors had been reduced to ashes. Tavano's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. He could feel Zalika's eyes on him, waiting for him to hesitate, waiting for fear to take hold. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the cave. As he entered the darkness, the air grew hotter, the walls pulsing with an eerie red glow. The deeper he went, the stronger the scent of burnt earth filled his lungs. And then he heard it, the slow, deep hiss of something alive, something waiting. Njoro. The serpent was coiled in the heart of the cave, its massive body shimmering like molten gold. Its eyes flickered like embers, and when it opened its mouth, flames crackled between its fangs. One wrong move, and Tavano would be nothing more than smoke and ash. He had no weapons, no armor, no shield, only his wits. Then, from the shadows, a voice whispered, a voice only he could hear. "Do not fight the fire, Tavano. Become it. Buzara." Her words wrapped around him like a spell, calming his racing heart. He took a slow breath and stepped forward. The serpent's gaze locked onto him, its body tensing, preparing to strike. But Tavano did not flinch. He did not run. He kneeled, lowering his head, showing no fear. The flames in the serpent's throat flickered uncertainly. Another whisper from Buzara. Breathe with it. Show it you are not its enemy. Tavano inhaled deeply, matching the rhythm of the beast's slow, fiery breath. The serpent hesitated. For the first time, it did not see a threat. It saw something else, something it could not understand. Tavano reached out, his hands steady, his movements slow. The villagers outside held their breath, expecting to hear the roar of fire, the screams of a man being burned alive, but there was only silence. And then, to the shock of all, Tavano emerged from the cave, his skin untouched, his clothes unburnt, and draped over his shoulders, like a living golden chain, was Njoro, the fire serpent, tamed and obedient. The crowd gasped. Even King Mokale leaned forward, unable to believe what he was seeing. Tavano met his gaze and spoke, his voice unwavering. The serpent is mine. For the first time, doubt flickered in the king's eyes. Tavano had done the impossible, and this was only the beginning. The sun was high when King Mokale announced the second task. The people had barely recovered from the shock of Tavano taming the fire serpent, but now their curiosity burned even brighter. The next task, the king declared, his voice echoing through the village, is one that no magic can deceive. Tavano must bring back water from the Soconi River. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Soconi River was no ordinary river. It was said to be enchanted, a mirror to the soul. Any man who looked into its waters would see his true self, his sins, his lies, his secrets. And if Buzara was truly cursed, her reflection would reveal the truth for all to see. Tavano stood still, his mind racing. He knew this test was not about strength or courage. It was a trap. If Buzara's secret was exposed, the kingdom would turn against her, against them both. Zalika smirked from the crowd. She had waited for this moment. No tricks, no whispers, just the pure, undeniable truth. She was sure the river would strip away whatever magic was hiding Buzara's true form. Tavano set out before the sun dipped too low, carrying an empty golden flask given to him by the king. The journey to the Soconi River was long, and as he walked, he felt the weight of unseen eyes watching him. The villagers weren't the only ones waiting for the truth. The spirits of the river itself would judge him. By nightfall, he reached the water's edge. The river was eerily still, glowing under the moonlight like a silver path stretching into the unknown. Tavano knelt, but before he could scoop the water, a soft voice floated through the air. "Tavano!" Buzara's whisper reached him, though she was nowhere in sight. "Be careful. The river does not lie." His hands trembled. He knew what she meant. If she looked into this water, her secret would be revealed. The woman who had transformed before his eyes, the beautiful, mysterious Buzara, would no longer be hidden. He turned his head, and there she was, standing in the shadows of the trees. She had followed him, just as he had hoped. "The water must be collected," Tavano said softly, "but your reflection must never be seen." Buzara nodded, her mind already working. She pulled her veil over her face and took slow steps backward, far from the water's edge. She found a thick tree branch and, with delicate hands, stretched it over the river's surface, creating a distorted ripple that danced with the moonlight. "Now," she whispered. Tavano lowered the flask carefully, never letting his eyes meet his own reflection. The water swirled into the container, untouched by the truth it carried. As soon as the flask was full, he sealed it and stood, his heart pounding. A gust of wind blew through the trees, and the river stilled once more. Tavano exhaled. They had done it. By dawn, he returned to the village, the golden flask heavy in his hands. He walked straight to the king and placed it at his feet. "The water of Soconi," he announced. The crowd held its breath. King Mokale studied him, his sharp eyes scanning Tavano's face. "And did you see the truth?" Tavano met his gaze without flinching. "I saw what I needed to see." The king narrowed his eyes, then looked down at the flask. The water shimmered inside, revealing nothing but the sky above. Silence. Then, slowly, Mokale nodded. "Very well," he said. "You have passed the second task." The villagers erupted into murmurs. Some were impressed, others suspicious. Zalika's smile faltered. Buzara had escaped the truth once again, but the final test still awaited them, and this time there would be nowhere to hide. The village was silent as King Mokale rose from his throne, his expression unreadable. The first 2 tasks had not broken Tavano, but this final challenge would be different. For your last test, the king announced, his voice heavy with authority, you must enter the forbidden forest and survive until dawn. A shudder passed through the crowd. The forbidden forest was not just a place of darkness, it was cursed. It was said that spirits of the lost wandered there, whispering to those who dared to enter, driving them to madness. No one who had spent a night there had ever returned the same. Tavano's heart pounded, but he did not hesitate. He had no choice. The king's eyes bore into him, waiting for a flicker of fear, a sign of weakness. But Tavano would not give him the satisfaction. I will go, he said firmly. By nightfall, he stood at the entrance of the forest, the towering trees looming like silent giants. A chilling wind whispered through the branches, carrying the faint sound of distant voices, voices that did not belong to the living. The villagers stood far back, unwilling to get too close. Even the bravest among them feared what lay beyond. Zalika watched with cold satisfaction, certain that this time Tavano would not return. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air grew heavy, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. The trees twisted unnaturally, their gnarled branches reaching toward him as if alive. Shadows moved without light, and whispers danced through the air, soft and eerie. Tavano! The voices were everywhere, surrounding him, calling his name in tones both familiar and strange. Some sounded like people he had known, long gone from this world. Others were unrecognizable, yet they spoke with the intimacy of old friends. His pulse quickened. He knew the stories, how the spirits played tricks, how they lured men deeper into the darkness until they forgot who they were. He had to stay strong. He had to survive until dawn. But then, the whispers changed. They were no longer just voices. They became laughter, cries, echoes of sorrow. Shapes flickered in the trees, pale figures with hollow eyes, drifting closer, their presence colder than ice. His vision blurred. His body felt heavy. The spirits were draining him, pulling at his soul. And then, just as the darkness threatened to consume him, a voice cut through the air. A voice unlike the others. Software, strong, familiar. Tavano, listen to me. His breath caught. He knew that voice. Buzara. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen but near, she was there. He could feel her presence, warm and steady against the suffocating cold. Then, a soft chant filled the air. Ancient words, whispered in a language older than the trees. The spirits recoiled, their whispers turning to hisses. The air trembled. The figures in the darkness flickered, their forms unraveling like smoke. Tavano closed his eyes, focusing on the melody of her voice. It wrapped around him like a shield, keeping the spirits at bay. The night stretched on, endless and unforgiving, but Buzara never stopped whispering. She stayed with him, unseen, but protecting him. Her presence the only thing keeping the spirits from claiming him. And then, just as the first light of dawn touched the treetop, the whispers faded. The forest grew still. The spirits were gone. Tavano opened his eyes. The weight pressing on his chest had lifted. He was alive. He had survived. With steady steps, he walked out of the forest, back into the world of the living. The villagers gasped. Even King Mokale looked surprised. No man had ever endured a night in the forbidden forest and come back whole. Tavano stood before the king, his gaze unwavering. The task is done, he said. Mokale studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You have proven yourself. The crowd erupted in murmurs, a mix of awe and unease. Zalika's face twisted with disbelief, but deep in the shadows, Buzara watched. Unseen, a small smile on her lips. The final task was complete, but their true test was yet to come. The village erupted in shock and amazement as Tavano emerged from the forbidden forest, his steps steady, his eyes clear. No one had expected him to survive the night. The whispers spread like wildfire. How had he done it? What kind of power did he possess? King Mokale sat on his throne, his expression unreadable. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. He had set 3 impossible tasks, each meant to break Tavano, to expose the truth behind his mysterious wife. Yet, against all odds, Tavano had succeeded. With the fire serpent he had shown courage. With the river's water he had proven his wisdom. and with the spirits he had displayed a strength that no man had ever possessed. The king could no longer deny it. "You have done what no other man could," Mokale said, his voice firm but reluctant. "You have earned your place." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some were in awe, others in disbelief. Zalika stood in the shadows, her hands clenched into fists. She had watched Tavano overcome every challenge, slip through every trap, but she was not done yet. Later that night, as the village celebrated Tavano's triumph, Zalika approached him with a gentle smile, her voice soft and inviting. "You truly are remarkable," she said. "No man has ever completed the king's tasks. Tell me, Tavano, what is your secret?" Tavano, still caught in the warmth of victory, did not sense the trap. He chuckled, shaking his head. "There is no secret, Zalika, only determination and faith." She stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with hidden intent. "Faith in what?" she pressed. "Or in whom?" Tavano hesitated. His thoughts drifted to Buzara, to her whispers in the forest, her guidance in the cave, her unseen hand protecting him at every step. Zalika caught the shift in his expression and leaned in, lowering her voice. "It was her, wasn't it? Buzara helped you." Tavano stiffened. The air between them grew tense. Zalika's smile widened. "She isn't who she appears to be, is she?" A moment of silence, a single heartbeat, and then, without thinking, Tavano answered, a simple, careless truth, spoken in the haze of his triumph. "No, she's not." The words had barely left his lips before Zalika pulled away, her face lighting up with triumph. She turned sharply and called out to the crowd, "Did you hear that?" Her voice rang through the air, cutting through the celebration like a knife. "Tavano himself admits it. Buzara is hiding something." Gasps echoed from every corner of the village. The joyful laughter turned into fearful whispers. King Mokale's eyes darkened. Tavano's heart dropped. He had been tricked. And now the storm was coming. The moment Zalika's words rang through the air, the celebration came to a dead stop. The music silenced. The laughter faded. All eyes turned to Tavano, then to Buzara. King Mokale rose from his throne, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Is there something you are hiding?" Tavano's breath caught in his throat. He turned to Buzara, his heart pounding. She stood still, her face pale, her fingers trembling at her sides. She knew what was coming. The whispers grew louder. Fear crept into the villagers' eyes. Some took a step back. Zalika smirked, knowing she had won. Buzara gasped, clutching her chest as a violent shudder ran through her body. Her knees buckled, and before Tavano could reach her, she collapsed to the ground. The crowd gasped. A terrible silence fell as Buzara's body trembled, and then, before everyone's eyes, her beauty began to fade. Her smooth skin withered, her dark hair thinned, turning grey. The glow of youth vanished from her face, replaced by deep lines and hollowed eyes. The villagers screamed. Some covered their mouths. Others stumbled back, unable to believe what they were seeing. "She's cursed!" someone shouted. "She's a deceiver!" another cried. Tavano dropped to his knees beside her, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Buzara!" His voice was desperate, filled with fear. She lifted her eyes to his, and in them he saw sorrow, pain, and something else, acceptance. "Tavano," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The pact, it is broken." His stomach twisted. He realized too late. His words, his careless confession, had shattered the magic that protected her. He had betrayed her without meaning to. The king's face darkened. "She is not who she claimed to be," he declared, his voice like thunder. "She has deceived us all." The guards moved forward, their spears glinting in the firelight. The villagers, once filled with admiration, now looked at Buzara with fear and disgust. They had loved her beauty, but now they saw only the curse. Tavano's hands clenched into fists. His heart screamed against the injustice, but he knew he had done this, and now the kingdom wanted blood. The moment Buzara's true form was revealed, chaos erupted in the village. Gasps of horror filled the air, followed by shouts of anger and fear. People who had once admired her beauty now recoiled as if she were a monster. Mothers clutched their children. Elders muttered prayers, and warriors reached for their weapons. King Mokale's face twisted with rage. He rose from his throne, his voice thundering through the square. She has deceived us all. This is a trick of dark magic. She must be captured at once. The guards surged forward, their spears raised, their eyes filled with the king's fury. Buzara lay weak on the ground, her body trembling from the broken curse. She tried to rise, but her limbs felt like stone. The magic that had once protected her was gone. Now, she was vulnerable, exposed. Tavano's heart pounded. He had caused this. He had spoken the words that doomed her, and now he would not let her be taken. "No!" he shouted, stepping in front of Buzara, arms spread wide. "She is not a threat." The guards hesitated, but the king's command was absolute. "She is a deceiver. Stand aside, Tavano." Tavano shook his head. "She is my wife. I will not let you harm her." Zalika, watching from the crowd, smirked. "Look at him," she sneered, "still protecting the witch. Has she bewitched you so completely?" The villagers murmured in agreement. Fear turned to anger. "She must be punished," someone yelled. "She tricked us all. Destroy her before she curses us." Tavano's pulse raced. He knew this would not end with capture. The people wanted vengeance. They would not stop until Buzara was erased from existence. The guards stepped closer. Tavano clenched his fists, his mind racing. He was outnumbered, but he would not surrender her. He turned to Buzara, his voice urgent. "Can you stand?" She looked up at him, her eyes full of sorrow. "I am not strong enough." Tavano tightened his grip on her. "Then I will fight for both of us." The first guard lunged. Tavano dodged, striking back with raw fury. Another came at him and he spun, kicking the spear from his hands. He had trained as a warrior his whole life, but he had never fought against his own people. "Seize them!" Mokale bellowed. More guards rushed forward. Tavano struck, blocked, dodged, but there were too many. A spear grazed his shoulder. A fist slammed into his ribs. He staggered, but still, he did not fall. Buzara watched in helpless agony. She had given Tavano everything, her love, her magic, her protection, and now he was bleeding for her. "Tavano," she whispered, but he would not stop. He roared in defiance, knocking another guard to the ground. "I will not let you take her." The villagers, once his friends and neighbors, were now his enemies. Their eyes burned with betrayal. They would not listen. A second wave of guards advanced. Tavano braced himself, knowing he could not hold them off forever. The kingdom had turned against them. There was only one choice left. They had to run. Tavano's breath came in ragged gasps as he pulled Buzara to her feet. The villagers were closing in, torches blazing, their faces twisted with anger and fear. The once familiar place, the village he had called home, was now a cage. There was no reasoning with them. They wanted blood. Buzara was weak, her body trembling from the broken curse, but she held on to Tavano, trusting him completely. "We have to go," he whispered urgently. "Now!" With one last look at the furious mob, he tightened his grip on her hand and bolted toward the edge of the village. The crowd roared in protest. "Don't let them escape!" someone shouted. The king's guards charged after them, their spears gleaming under the moonlight. Tavano ran faster, his legs burning, his heart pounding. Buzara stumbled, but he caught her, lifting her into his arms. He would not let her fall. The wilderness loomed ahead, dark, endless, unknown. No one dared enter it at night, for the land beyond the village was said to be cursed. The trees stood like silent giants, their twisted branches reaching for the sky. It was a place of myths and nightmares, but Tavano had no choice. He plunged into the darkness, branches slashing at his skin, the sounds of the angry villagers fading behind him. The ground was uneven, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and old magic. Strange noises echoed in the distance, whispers in the wind, rustling in the shadows. Buzara shivered in his arms. "Tavano, this place." "I know," he said, his voice tight, "but it's the only way." Behind them, the villagers stopped at the forest's edge, their torches flickering. They would not follow. Even their fury did not outweigh their fear of what lay beyond. King Mokal's voice rang through the night. "You will never return. If you do, you will be hunted like animals." Tavano didn't look back. He pressed on, deeper into the unknown. The darkness swallowed them whole. Their old life was gone. A new fate awaited them. Whether it would lead to salvation or destruction, only time would tell.